and welcome back to the live series podcast brought to you by Amicus Recruitment. This is the podcast that gives you insight into the life and role of tech leaders from all over the world. And today I'm joined by VP of Engineering over at PlanetScale, Nick. How are you doing, Nick?
I'm doing great, thank you. How about yourself?
Yeah, I'm so good, thanks. I know, I was just saying there, we moved into a new office recently, and this is only the second time I've done a podcast in this new room. So the amount of kind of haphazard faffing that went on just before I hit record was unnecessary.
I would have had no idea. I would have had no idea at
I
all.
know I shouldn't have said anything, should I? The poor listeners haven't got a clue either. I know I'm really chuffed to have you on. I know when we chatted a little bit before, you're a super enthusiastic person, and it's really obvious that you've got a lot of experience under your belt. So for anyone who's maybe not heard of PlanetScale or heard of yourself, do you want to maybe just give like a little bit of insight into your role and a little bit about PlanetScale too?
Yeah, happy to. So thank you for the great introduction. My name is Nick Van Wiggeren. Currently, I'm the VP of Engineering at PlanetScale, which is a database as a service company. So we provide serverless databases that scale from zero all the way to petabytes and petabytes of storage. We've been at it now for about 4 years, built on top of an open source technology called Vitess, which was actually invented at YouTube. So we're here to provide better scale and better developer experience to people who are building applications. I myself have been here for about 2.5 years. I started my career in cloud infrastructure, building storage at DigitalOcean. I worked at GitHub for a number of years as an engineering manager and an engineering director. And here at PlanetScale, I've been running our engineering team now for about 2 of those 2.5 years. So really excited to be here. Thank you again for the invite. And yeah, excited to talk a little bit about engineering leadership.
Yeah, I mean, again, when we chatted before, it's pretty obvious you've got some really cool experience. And I think one thing that I really wanted to dive into, so I am just going to go straight there now, is that
Awesome.
you currently run a pretty remote team, right? And I think that's such an interesting topic because when I first started the podcast, it kind of was slightly just on the edge of coming out of COVID. So it was a big topic at the time, but not really had like too many people coming on who have been able to talk about it minus the COVID experience, if that makes sense. So kind of out
Totally.
remote working minus the COVID, and it's nice to kind of chat about that with someone who has, you know, some really cool experience linked to that. So just for a bit of context, like where's your team based? Like, is it fully remote or completely hybrid? Remind me as well.
Yeah, great question. So where we are now at PlanetScale, we are completely remote. We do not have a big physical office. We have like a mailing address and a small place in San Francisco, but our engineering team is full-time remote. We're distributed all around the globe and pretty much every continent you could think of. And we've been that way since day one, not because of the pandemic, not because of anything like that, but because we think it's a great way to grow an engineering team and to grow an organization. So yeah, we've been remote first, remote friendly for the whole time of the company.
Yeah, I love that. And that's why I kind of said about it's nice to chat minus the COVID stuff because it's not a result
Yeah.
of it. It's just from the day dot. That was kind of the concept that you just wanted to structure the team around, which is really cool. How have you found that in yourself as a leader? I know you said obviously you've got leadership experience in the past and stuff, but like, you know, did you come into PlanetScale as a leader who was looking for that kind of remote role, or did you kind of just fall into it and it's kind of you've had to adapt to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've actually been leading remote teams for most of my career. For the longest time when I got my first engineering manager job now a decade ago, makes me feel old. My team was again distributed a little bit more North America central, but we had some folks in Europe as well. But for a really long time, I was the only person in the office and everybody else was remote. So I would be in a meeting room on Google Meet or on Zoom, and the only person in the meeting room would be me and everyone else would be up on the screen. So I've kind of been doing remote management for as long as I've been doing management. Now at other companies, you know, we've been a little bit more in-person heavy or a little bit more remote heavy, and PlanetScale is definitely the most remote heavy, right? No office, nothing like that. But it's something that I've really learned to cherish, the flexibility and the ability to hire the best talent around the world. So it's definitely for me a bit of a prerequisite that a company is at least remote friendly, because it really removes a lot of barriers and it really adds a lot of flexibility and stuff to the culture. So I knew what I was getting myself into, but it's definitely different to grow an earlier stage startup that way than it is a much more established company where there's a lot more people and a lot more process and stuff like that. So that has definitely been a challenge for me personally.
For sure. Do you think you prefer it overall, or is it hard to say?
You know, some days I love it. Some days I love being able to work with people all around the world. I love being able to see how you can use time zones to your advantage. You know, you've got someone in San Francisco, handing something off to someone in Asia, handing something off to someone in Europe. And some days I wish I could just get everyone on my team in one room and talk to them, because it's almost impossible to do that between time zones and Zoom and stuff like that. So I'd say I have a love-hate relationship with it. But ultimately, I think it's the only way to build a team in 2023 and beyond is to be at least remote flexible. So it's something we're all going to have to learn how to do well.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, to be honest, especially like even if you can't do it fully, just be flexible with it at least. And especially when it comes
Exactly.
to time zones, right? Like that's got to be, I mean, I don't think like we have an office in Austin. And I think for marketing sometimes that can be a little bit of a little chaotic, I'm not gonna lie, just because even just something like a simple social media post can be like scattered across the globe at the complete wrong time. But I couldn't even imagine kind of trying to actually manage a full team of people that are scattered all over the globe. So like how is that? I know you said it's kind of a love-hate relationship, but how did you kind of, what have you kind of learned to adapt the most with that? And has your managerial style itself actually changed as well, would you say?
Absolutely. So I think when we look at managerial style and managing remote, I think the most important thing is communication and alignment. And that is probably always the case, but with a remote first workforce, right? It's written communication first. It's saying something in every single medium. So we have rewatch TV to record videos so that when we do all hands, people in other time zones can watch them. We're very specific about making sure that we communicate clearly in Slack. We have our own internal kind of message board discussion piece of software that we call Beam, which is actually open sourced, that we use just for asynchronous communication and announcements. And so what we've really had to rotate on, and what we really have to rotate on, is making sure that it's not just about what people are doing, listening to you right in the moment, but can they come back later and read what you've written? Can someone who wakes up and was asleep the entire time you were working read what you wrote and then have it make sense and know what they're doing? So my management style has really had to be a lot more asynchronous communication, a lot more making myself incredibly clear. You can't micromanage someone that works in a time zone that's 13 hours offset from you. You'll stay up till 4, you'll make them stay up until 4 in the morning, and all of these kinds of things. So it forces you to think, okay, if I can't make sure that everything's going exactly the way that I want, how do I communicate what I do want so that it still gets done?
Yeah, I think that sounds almost like the impossible feat, really. You've got to be really hands-off and really trusting of your team, haven't you, essentially? And you're right about the documentation of things, like making it so clear, like almost unnaturally clarifying things, because even as humans, we tend to have we have the tendency 100% to kind of just explain things in our 100%. Way of explaining it. And especially if you're face-to-face, then you've got a lot of benefits to get that point across even more. Whereas if it's someone like you said who's reading it 13 hours after you've written it or 13 hours after you've done the video, they're going to have all kinds of questions regardless of how well you did or didn't do explaining something, and they just don't have you there to kind of ask, and they don't have you there to explain.
Exactly.
We're past that. It sounds like such a difficult thing to have to manage, but again, it also sounds like you're doing a really good job, and you've the asynchronous approach is obviously so important, like you said there. How I mentioned trust there. How do you, I mean, it's, you'd like to think that your team trusts you, right? And that you trust your team, obviously. So without sounding too obvious with this question, how do you kind of measure how well that dynamic is and how healthy that dynamic is with team? And I don't obviously want you to kind of out anybody performance or anything like that, but if somebody, how do you kind of catch up with someone if they're not really doing what you expect them to, or how can you just kind of walk me through your approach to that?
Fantastic question. I think the first and most important answer there is probably to have a culture of feedback, and that's not just top down but sideways and even bottom up. So what I've really tried to do, and what we really tried to do at PlanetScale, is cultivate a culture where people feel comfortable giving feedback to each other. It doesn't get kind of bottled up until a performance review process. It doesn't get bottled up until it gets so bad that somebody has to say something. And we don't always succeed at this. There are people and moments even today where I know I need to push them to give each other feedback, or I need to be giving more feedback. But I think the most important thing is to create an environment where people feel comfortable knowing they can give feedback to people and people will receive it. And that also then opens them up to being able to receive feedback and getting to say, hey, I can do this better, or you're right, or my apologies. And ultimately, one of the things that working remotely takes away is that face-to-face moment with people where if you're having a hard time with someone at work, you can go out to dinner, grab a even sit together at lunch and at least talk about something that's not work, talk about something in your personal life, or even talk about something that's work related. But that really helps break down some of those barriers and helps people trust each other. So in absence of being able to do that, I just am very explicit. I tell people all the time, give that feedback. When someone comes to me and says, hey, X or Y or this or that made me frustrated, I say, fantastic. This is a great opportunity to go give them that feedback. And so really just try and be really, really, really obvious about it so that people hear it from me over and over and over and over again. Model it. So when people give me feedback, I respond, and then just kind of reinforce it. And I think that's the only way to create that dynamic. And, if you don't live it as a leader, it doesn't matter. So I also have to be the one out in front, taking feedback, admitting when I'm wrong, and kind of doing all of those kinds of things in the hope that people will emulate that and see, hey, if Nick can do that, so can we all.
Yeah, I think what a brilliant approach as well. I think vulnerability as a leader is such an important aspect of building trust, isn't it? Ultimately, it sounds like such an obvious thing, but I've had obviously people, we've talked about this in previous episodes, but kind of especially when you're new to a leadership role or you're new to a company, you kind of have this guard up and you just don't want to let it down because you kind of want to give off this, even if it's subconsciously, you don't want to give off this sense that you're incapable of the job. And for a lot of people, that mindset means not showing vulnerability and kind of making out like you can do no wrong almost, and that conveys such a kind of inaccurate message to your team. Like you just said perfectly, you want to show vulnerability, you want to kind of have your team emulate a really open dynamic with each other, and they can't do that if they're not seeing that from above. Do you get, I mean, this is quite a direct question, but
yeah,
you said in the beginning of your answer there, like kind of getting feedback from the bottom up, like do you get that a lot from, how do you instill the confidence in people to want to kind of give feedback upwards? Because that's a tough thing to kind of do in a lot of places, right?
It absolutely is. And the answer is some, but not as much as I want. But a quick anecdote about this. So when I joined PlanetScale, I was a director of engineering, and there were a few other directors of engineering. About 6 months into my tenure at the company, I became the VP and started managing those directors, which is already kind of an awkward situation. You've got someone that used to be your peer, you're now their manager. And it was the first time I had been a VP of engineering. So I knew it was stepping into a role that, maybe I had some of the skills, but certainly not all of the skills to do. And one of the first things I did was sit down with, kind of all of those folks and say, look, I'm going to mess up. I'm going to have feedback for you, but just know I'm not walking into this, just like you said, thinking I have every single skill, thinking I know everything I need to do the job, super confident. Quite the opposite. And this is only going to work if you can make sure you tell me when I fall short. If you can tell me when, you've had a VP of engineering as a manager before, what did they do that I'm not doing that you need? And so I really tried hard to do the opposite of kind of sit in an ivory tower and, tell people they were always wrong. I solicited feedback from that very first second. And I think that is my attempt at just, really telling people, hey, again, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. And they were really good discussions. These were people that I'd worked with before. These are people that I had even had conflict with. And it was really useful to just be able to level set and say, look, I know what this means and you know what this means, but it's not going to work for either of us unless we work together and have an open dialogue of feedback. And I get it. It's still hard. No one wants to no one wants to tell their boss they're wrong, or they've done something wrong, but it's so important.
Yeah, I love that that fable. That's not the right word, but you know what I mean. That kind of anecdote there about when you first started, because it was. I think you're right. You're absolutely right in terms of being able to get that feedback from the bottom, and the fact that it was your peer at one time as well, super difficult. But you wanted to instantly fill in the gaps for them, and I feel like that's almost kind of like a servant kind of managerial style almost, where it's like you said, you don't want to be up in your ivory tower, you kind of just want to be down on their level and supporting them. Your job is to support them, right, and enable them, as opposed to kind of telling them to do things. And that's another way that you're going to gain trust in your team, right? In terms of what we've talked a little bit about being kind of globally remote, which genuinely is something that's still super impressive to me. And I've never worked at a company before that's being globally remote. So I always find it super impressive. But I guess is managing teams in that situation too. How do you kind of assess what the dynamic is like globally? Do you have like pockets of teams, or is it kind of like one person's over there and one person's over there? Or, you know, I know you said there's like maybe a cluster in San Fran, but in terms of like actually being able to really figure out what the overall kind of motivations are and kind of what the morale's like, do you do that, or do you kind of just rely on this kind of individual feedback for that?
Yeah, fantastic question. So we definitely, you know, when I think of pockets, I think of pockets in terms of time zones, because that kind of, you know, controls when you're at work. And we absolutely make an effort to kind of touch on a lot of those different time zones. So we alternate our all hands times, for example, with Q&A. So some of them we do very early in the morning Pacific time. We'll do a 6 a.m. all hands. And I mean, is it fun to get up at 5 and do a 6 a.m. all hands? Absolutely not. But then you get to do a Q&A with people who, you know, that might be even still be 4, 5, 6 p.m. their time, but at least they can make it. Sometimes we'll do them late in the day so that we can get, you know, Asia Pacific. And it's those kinds of things where we try and kind of rotate the normal company mechanisms for feedback and the normal company mechanisms for morale. We kind of try and rotate through so we can get India, or so that we can get Europe, or so that we can get, you know, other parts of the company, to make sure that, you know, everyone understands the majority of people are in probably between Pacific time and Eastern time, honestly, or, you know, something like that. But we really make an effort to make people know we understand that there are still people outside of those time zones. We do want to create the opportunity for kind of the same team building, morale, Q&A, and stuff like that, regardless of where they are. So we do put an effort in. I'd say this is an area where it's really easy to fall short. It's really easy to say, I don't want to wake up at 5 a.m. for the third week in a row. I don't want to wake up at 5 a.m. again. And you can kind of get lazy. But we really have to make sure that we don't do that, because people notice, right? Even if people don't have feedback, or even if morale is good, it will make people frustrated if they feel like they never get an opportunity that other people get to kind of talk with the boss, or talk with leadership or something like that.
Fully, that kind of one-on-one time is like a really basic feature that everybody needs at work, isn't it? And you do start to feel neglected pretty quickly, I suppose.
Yep.
And you need that exposure with your peers, and definitely with the person who's above you and whoever your direct report is. It's so crucial. And like, I think, like you said, I really like your approach to the different time zones. You're not excluding anybody. You're really hammering home like the importance of not excluding anybody. Like you said, there is a couple that are probably landing within, like, so it's like roughly similar, but then there are people elsewhere anyway.
Yep.
So you definitely don't want to be excluding people because of where they live, essentially.
100%.
And on that kind of, I know you kind of said globally, I can't remember, sorry, how big you said the team was. Would you mind just walking us through kind of the structure of the team in terms of you know, got tech leads, how big are the squad,
Yeah.
like that?
Great question. So yeah, our engineering team is a bit over 40 people right now. So that's kind of divided up into 3 different areas. Each of those areas has a manager, and then we kind of have tech leads interspersed throughout that. So for us, tech lead is a much more informal role. We kind of try and give everyone an opportunity to be a leader at something. So we've kind of stolen a little bit of Apple's DRI, or directly responsible individual model. So even for specific or small projects, we'll try and give folks the opportunity to kind of be the lead for that project, see it through from start to finish. And again, you know, we believe kind of everyone can be a leader in one area or another. So outside of those 3 directors and myself, there's no other formal management inside of that group of 40. It's really just kind of case by case, project by project, and going from there. And that also allows us to be flexible around things like time zones. So if we have a certain team that might be more heavy in India, or a certain team that might be more heavy in Europe, well, we don't need a manager and a director to go wake up with them every day and check on the project. We can kind of find someone local in that time zone and say, you're the lead, you know, kind of, you have the baton, and then they're able to work with all of the people in their time zone and get stuff done. So I think for us, we try to be pretty flexible on the management side, and focus less on people management and telling people what to do, and focus more on empowerment.
Yeah, you said the word exactly that I was going to say then, flexible. It sounds like it could also have so many benefits of that, apart from everything that you've just said, in terms of when you're that flexible, say given a certain project, and you're not just like, yeah, I know you said, you used the phrase there, giving someone the baton, and that's a really good way of phrasing it, because you're not putting somebody kind of permanently in charge of something, and you're also giving that person the flexibility to lean on other people in terms of
Yep.
different skill sets and things like that. You're not just putting one person with one skill set in charge of everything. It's the kind of the floor's still open, right, for other people to chip in and chime away at everything. And I think that's such a great approach. Like, I really like that a lot. On that again, in terms of managing culture between different countries and coaching people through, obviously I know you said yourself and the directors, presumably when you are giving someone kind of this flexible role, there's some coaching maybe that comes into it on occasion or something like that, or you need to be supportive, right? So
Yep.
does the different kind of, I mean, and I'm talking on the global side of things,
Yep.
different cultures come into play when it comes to that? Does it affect communication or anything like that as well?
Absolutely. And we have people who, English might not be their first language, and, they have grown up with a completely different experience, completely different work expectations and things like that. So, I think it became popular, at least in the US, to talk about, bring your whole self to work and stuff like that. And that's not really what I go for. I certainly don't bring my whole self to work. There's a, version of me that shows up at work that's tries to be funny and, brings part of my personal life in. But what I try to do is understand the person behind the Zoom. So I want to understand what motivates them. I want to understand how they receive feedback, whether that's culturally, whether that's a preference. And I want to spend some time, as much as I can, just kind of getting to know them, so that when I do need to coach, or when someone does need to coach them, we know the right style, we know the right approach. And this is really hard to do because, you've got people from all walks of life. You've got people from all levels of experience, from a bunch of different cultures, who maybe never had a manager that manages in your style. And so if you go and assume, hey, one size fits all, and I've seen this go incredibly poorly, right? People receive feedback, or people not even realizing I'm trying to offer feedback, and then understanding what the point of the conversation is. So you definitely have to spend some time really warming up to people, I think, before you can launch right into that. And that will also help you understand their morale. That will help you understand a lot of how to make sure that they're happy, but you have to care. And that's kind of the most important part, is you have to really want to say, hey, I'm responsible for this person's success. That's a responsibility of my own as their manager. So I'm going to learn what it takes to do that. Because if you just, again, sit there in an ivory tower and start telling people, do this, do this, do this, do this, yeah, you messed that up, do this, it's game over. They won't, people won't respect you. They won't like you, and they'll go find a new job.
Yeah, and nobody wants that, do they? In terms of what you just said there, it's quite interesting about bringing your whole self to work. I know you said that's more something in the US, and there's a lot of people that I mean, and this isn't a specific thing to you. I've just obviously had a vast. I find it really interesting because I've had such a vast kind of amount of attitudes towards this particular topic. So even though it's not the specific thing that I wanted to talk about today, I am interested to get your input on this, because it's something that personally really interests me, in terms of bringing your whole self to work. What does that mean to you? I know you said there about kind of, just trying to deep dive on people's professional preferences, which I think is great, especially when it comes to finding out people's feedback responses and things like that, and really figuring out what they actually want to receive and how they want to receive it, and the kind of coaching that they want to get, because that sounds to me like you're setting them up with a pretty, well, as close to ideal working environment for that person as you can, which sounds great. But what if they kind of, how explorative, or that's not the right word, but how kind of deep into people's outside of work things would you get into, for example? Or have you ever kind of had to tell someone to kind of put the foot on the gas a little bit, and that they're taking private life into work too much, almost like that might be a little bit too far or something like that? Has that ever kind of happened?
Absolutely. And I think it's a really fun, I think, push and pull for a leader to figure out what the right level to go is. But, sometimes, and it's inevitable that people do bring their personal life into work, and to a certain extent, right, that's great. I think you can't show up to work and assume you're a robot and say, well, I've got this hard firewall. Everything that happens before 8 a.m. doesn't matter. Everything that happens after 5 p.m. doesn't matter. I'm just at work for these 8 hours or 9 hours, and that's it. That's not feasible. But if you have people showing up and they're bringing their frustrations out on their coworkers, or they're not showing up because of something in their personal life, you do have to kind of figure out how to work with them to at least understand what it is, even at a high level, and kind of how to help them at work. And I have absolutely had to tell people, right, either go take some time off, right? This is a problem I can't fix. This is a problem you can fix. The only thing I can do is kind of give you the space to fix it. I've had to tell people that, this is not an appropriate work conversation, i.e., you're looking to me for emotional support, and it's emotional support that I can't provide for your personal life. And I want to say, like, I don't think that, the opposite of bring your full self to work is not bring nothing to work. It's bring the personality that you have at work and show up and be 100%. But you do have to create some barrier, lest people, I think, get, too much of your personal life, and it becomes something, I think, that is counterintuitive. If you are too invested in work, you can't receive feedback anymore. If you're too invested in work, you can't grow. And so you do have to have some barrier there, but it's always a balancing act. And some people will always want, I think, a bit more support. And some people will show up and they'll say, no, I have no problem. Just tell me everything I've done wrong. Which is a bad way to word it, but they'll say that, and then I'll go do better. So you have to tailor it to the individual person, but you also have to set boundaries. You can't be carrying other people's burdens outside of work as a leader. That will also not go well.
100%. I think I probably agree with everything you've said there, to be honest. And I love that point of kind of, you 100% should bring your personality to work, but your personal life is a separate entity to work at the end of the day. People want your personality, and they want your professional personality and out of work personality, but
100%.
That is a different thing to bringing up your personal life as a separate thing. And yeah, finding emotional support in your boss isn't necessarily always the right way. It depends on the dynamic, obviously, I suppose.
100%.
It's not something that you kind of expect as a leader, for sure. Just on that, I'm sort of kind of, I don't want to round up the episode on that kind of, arguable sort of point, but in terms of the individuals on your team, and it doesn't have to be specifically, at PlanetScale, I just mean kind of sort of generally speaking, how do you kind of, I mean, we've covered a bunch of it and it sounds like a really great job, but how do you actively ensure that your individuals are feeling valued in what they do? And I know we've covered a little bit about feedback and things like that, and obviously the kind of the personal boundary on things, which are all great points. How do you kind of measure yourself also when it comes to that kind of thing? Like, how do you measure yourself and be like, am I doing a good job of making them feel finally valued?
Yeah, totally. At a previous job, I set myself a rule that whenever I was talking about work that, my teams did in public, so like a public meeting, like in Slack when everyone can see it, or in an email, I don't thank individuals, because that always makes somebody feel left out, and it's a team effort. So one of the kind of things I established for myself was, I want the team to be appreciated. I want everyone to feel like they contributed, because they did. Now, that does not mean that I don't thank individuals. The flip side of that is, I think one of the best things you can do to help someone feel appreciated is to understand what they did. So I spend a lot of time making sure I know what everyone on my team is working on, what the impact it has on the business, so that when they complete something, when they finish a task, or when they're done with some work, I can go in and I can actually thank them, maybe one-on-one or in a smaller group, and say, I appreciate X or Y. Because of that, we can do, A or B. Thank you for the hard work. And I really try to make people understand that I know what they're doing. I know why they show up. I know why we, are happy to have them at work. And that, I think, for me, is what's always helped me feel appreciated, is when I feel like my work goes noticed, and when I feel like people understand what I'm doing. And so I try to give that same thing to everybody else, because a lot of leaders, I think, just start to say, I have the best team, thank you so much to everyone, and then they list all 20 people, and then someone says, well, I feel left out, and they go and they add a 21st. And I think that's all great, and if that's the culture, that's the culture. But what I want is to go find the people that did the work, and I want to thank them for their part of that work, so that the next time they start something, they know Nick will understand, and I'm happy to do this.
Yeah, I think that's a really great approach, and you could have just said, well, I make sure that everyone gets praise for their individual and the team effort, but instead you made it clear that what I really like about your approach there is that you actually really figure out what people are doing, and you're not necessarily required to fully understand the ins and outs of absolutely everybody's tasks all the time. That would be overwhelming, but the fact that you kind of making that effort there is, and I would that must go appreciated, because I think that's critical, and unfortunately something that not everyone might actually like see
100%.
The boss, and there's it's one thing giving your team autonomy, which is great, but then there's also kind of a gray area of, do you really understand what they're doing while you give yourself this
Absolutely.
autonomy?
Yeah.
And
And sometimes I have to ask their manager, hey, can you walk me through? I cheat for sure. I cheat.
yeah.
But the end result, I hope, is that people know that I at least put the effort forward.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, reaching out even to the managers is showing that effort, isn't it? So that's 100%. I totally get you. And what a great point. Honestly, Nick, like I'm kind of gutted that I've ran out of questions. I feel like we could have gone on for way longer.
Definitely.
You've definitely been given made some really good points. I've just kind of got one last general question that I ask to all the guests. And it's very vague, so please be as vague as you like or as niche as you like with the answer. But it is a very general one. Of what advice would you have for any professionals that want to be in a similar position to you one day?
Yeah, I love that question. I'm sure you get so many different answers from all kinds of people. My advice is, I think, very specific and something that has done me really well. Now, advice that works for me won't work for everyone at every company, but my focus in my career has always been to do two things. It's been to solve more problems than I create for my managers and for the company, and it's been to focus on getting stuff done. And that sounds obvious, but so many companies I've worked at, the culture turns into, how can I get the most direct reports, or how can I build the biggest team, or how can I be responsible for the biggest project? And I've never been the one to focus on that. My job has always been to take as much as I have and to focus on just delivery, and to focus on being the person that people turn to when they say, I need this done, or I have a question, or I have a problem, and to solve it. And that for me has just helped me get, you end up getting on the big projects. You end up getting even if it's the challenging team that you have to clean up, being known as the person who gets stuff done and being known as the person who can be relied on for that has really helped me advance. That's not the person who always says yes. I say no, you have to, especially if you're in that role. But just being focused on that, at the end of the day, I'm going to see this through, whatever it takes. That has worked for me to help me climb in my career more than any other advice about being a manager, or any other advice. No matter what role you're in, you can focus on getting stuff done, the stuff that's right in front of you. And if you can do that, the world is your oyster.
Love that. Very, very clearly put. And I think it's, yeah, you're right. You can't argue with that, can you? It's do what you need to do and you will climb up naturally. Be that reliable guy, right? That's a great point. Or gal. But yeah, honestly, Nick, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Like I said, I feel like we've covered a bunch more topics than I expected us to, which has been great. I do always, just for listeners who don't know, like I always write questions before the episode, and I'll send them over to the guest just to kind of check through. And Nick was like, yeah, they're great questions. And I don't think I've asked a single question the same way twice.
A good podcast recording in that case.
Yeah. But you've spoken very eloquently and it's really appreciated. So yeah, thank you so much for your time, honestly. If you're watching on YouTube, you can hover over in the corner, on the logo in the corner, I should say, and hit subscribe. Follow us on all socials. And we're now on Threads, which we were debating for a long time, but we did it and I was not sure what to do about it, but we're on it anyway. So help us out and go and follow us on there. And check out amicusjobs.com for absolutely everything. We've got so much content now. It's ridiculous. Nick, honestly, thank you again so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.